A mother-in-law wearing a wedding dress to upstage the bride, then discovering her gold digger target is actually worth $500 million. For Isabella, this wasn't hypothetical, it was reality. When her future mother-in-law arrived in a white gown and publicly accused her of using a fake name to trap her son, most people would have caused a scene or canceled the wedding. But our guest chose strategy instead. I'm Eliza, and today on Wedding Day Justice, we're exploring how calculated responses transform betrayal into opportunity. Isabella's story proves that sometimes the best revenge isn't an emotional outburst. It's a perfectly timed revelation that changes everything.
Thank you, Eliza. I'm sharing this story because I want others to know that protecting yourself doesn't have to mean sacrificing your dignity. Sometimes the most powerful response to someone's cruelty is revealing your authentic self. Let me tell you what happened. I never wanted my fiancé to love me for my family's wealth or status. When James and I met 3 years ago at a charity fundraiser where I was volunteering, I introduced myself simply as Isabella Rossi. Not Isabella Rossi, daughter of Antonio Rossi, the billionaire tech mogul and philanthropist whose family had shaped the business landscape for generations. I'd spent my entire life watching people change when they discovered my background, suddenly becoming overly accommodating, hiding their true selves, or worse, seeing me as nothing but a walking trust fund. So when I met James Chen, a brilliant architect with kind eyes and a genuine passion for sustainable design, I made a choice. I would let him know me, the real me, before revealing my family's prominence. I told him I worked in nonprofit management, which was true. I just didn't mention that I ran my family foundation's $300 million endowment. I wore my mother's simple jewelry rather than the designer pieces gifted to me. I drove my modest Volvo to our dates instead of anything from my family's collection of luxury vehicles. When he picked me up, it was at my personal apartment in the city, not my family's estate overlooking the coast. James fell in love with Isabella, who volunteered at animal shelters on weekends, who could debate art history for hours, who cried during sad movies and sang terribly in the shower. Not Isabella Rossi, whose family name opened doors across 3 continents. Our relationship blossomed naturally. James proposed after 2 years with a ring that I knew represented months of his savings, a modest but beautiful diamond that meant more to me than any of the heirloom jewelry locked in my family's vault. I said yes immediately, tears streaming down my face, knowing I had found someone who loved me for myself. As wedding plans began, I knew I needed to tell him the truth. 3 months before our wedding, over a quiet dinner at my apartment, I finally revealed everything. I showed him photos of my family home, explained my actual role at the foundation, and braced myself for his reaction. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his expression more confused than angry. "Because I needed to know you loved me for me," I explained, "not for what my family has." James was quiet for a long moment before he laughed softly. "Bella, I fell in love with the woman who spends 30 minutes talking to the elderly cashier at the grocery store because she knows he's lonely, not with your family's net worth." The relief I felt was overwhelming. We agreed to continue keeping my background private until after the wedding, not out of deception, but because we wanted our wedding to be about us, not about the media circus that would inevitably follow once the Rossi name was attached. James understood and respected my wishes, promising to keep my secret even from his family. "My mother can be status-conscious," he admitted. "I'd rather she get to know you as the amazing woman you are first." Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove to be. Vivian Chen, James's mother, was not merely status-conscious. She was obsessed with appearances, social climbing, and what she called appropriate matches. And from the moment she met me, she decided I was not good enough for her son. My first meeting with Vivian Chen should have been a warning. She arrived at our engagement dinner in a Chanel suit, dripping in diamonds, her critical gaze sweeping over my simple black dress. Her smile never reached her eyes as she air-kissed my cheeks. "Isabella Rossi," she repeated my name slowly, as if testing its authenticity. "What an interesting name, Italian." "On my father's side," I answered. "My mother was part Native American." Something flickered in her eyes, a calculation and assessment. And what exactly does your family do? Before I could answer, James intervened. Mom, we're here to celebrate, not conduct an interview. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few months, Vivian's casual questions became increasingly pointed. Where had I gone to school? A small private college, not the Ivy League institution I'd actually attended. What neighborhood did my parents live in? I mentioned the city but was deliberately vague. How had we afforded my education? Scholarships, I said truthfully, omitting that my family had endowed several of them. 2 months before the wedding, I began noticing strange things. Twice, I spotted the same car parked outside my apartment building. Once, while having lunch with my cousin Alina, who worked as my assistant at the foundation, I noticed a man taking photos of us from across the restaurant. You're being paranoid, Alina said, but her eyes were concerned. I wasn't paranoid. A week later, James called me, his voice tight with anger. My mother hired a private investigator to look into your background. My blood ran cold. What did they find? Nothing much, he said. The PI told her your employment records seem vague and that your apartment seems modest for someone in nonprofit management. She's convinced you're hiding something, just not what you're actually hiding. We both laughed, but it was hollow. James was furious with his mother, but I convinced him not to confront her directly. Let's stick to our plan, I said. After the wedding, we'll tell everyone the truth. What I didn't anticipate was how far Vivian would go based on her incomplete information. At our rehearsal dinner, she cornered me in the restroom, her smile sharp as a knife. I know there's something off about you, she whispered. James may be blinded by whatever charms you possess, but I'm not. I've seen girls like you before, latching onto successful men, hiding their pasts. I kept my composure. Mrs. Chen, I love your son, that's all that matters. Love, she scoffed. How convenient. You know, I received an interesting tip about your so-called nonprofit work. Apparently, no one at the address listed on your resume has ever heard of an Isabella Rossi. My heart raced. Of course they hadn't. I worked at the foundation headquarters, not the satellite office I'd listed as my workplace. It was part of maintaining my privacy. There must be some mistake, I said smoothly. Oh, I don't think so. Her eyes glittered with triumph. I've invited several prominent charity directors to the wedding. I'm sure they'll be interested to meet the mysterious Isabella Rossi, who claims to manage millions in charitable giving yet leaves no footprint in their circles. She swept out, leaving me gripping the marble counter for support. This was escalating beyond what James and I had planned. I immediately texted him, "Your mother is digging deeper. She's invited people to verify my background at the wedding." His response was immediate, "Should we tell her now?" After a moment's thought, I replied, "No, let's proceed as planned, but let's call my father." That night, James and I had a long conversation with my father, Antonio Rossi. Despite his immense wealth and power, my father had always respected my desire for privacy and independence. When I explained the situation, he listened carefully. "So this woman thinks you're a gold digger," he said finally, his accent thickening as it always did when he was annoyed. "And she's trying to humiliate you at your own wedding." "Yes," I admitted. There was a long pause before my father spoke again, a hint of mischief in his voice. Then, perhaps it's time for the Rossi family to make a proper entrance. The plan we formed that night was simple but perfect. My father would not attend the rehearsal dinner or be seen before the ceremony. He would arrive at the cathedral just as the wedding began, making an entrance that would leave no doubt about who the Rossi family really was. What we didn't anticipate was Vivian's final, desperate act of sabotage. The morning of my wedding dawned clear and beautiful. I was getting ready in the bridal suite of the historic Cathedral James, and I had chosen for its soaring architecture and stained glass, not its Instagram potential. Alina was helping me with my hair when her phone buzzed repeatedly. "What is it?" I asked, noting her sudden frown. "Nothing," she said too quickly, sliding her phone into her pocket. "Alina." She sighed. "People are texting about Vivian. She's wearing white." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. White to her son's wedding. "Not just white," Alina admitted, showing me the photo someone had snapped. "A white gown, floor length, with a small train." The photo showed Vivian in what could only be described as a wedding gown, cream-colored silk with delicate beading, more appropriate for a bride than a mother of the groom. The message was clear. She was making a statement about who she thought was the true lady of honor today. "She's trying to upstage you," Alina said, her voice tight with anger. "Should I say something, or James could?" "No," I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "Let her wear what she wants." Alina stared at me. "Bella, she's deliberately trying to humiliate you. This is beyond passive-aggressive. It's a direct insult." I smiled, thinking of what was to come. "Trust me, she's only setting herself up." As I finished getting ready, more reports filtered in. Vivian was telling guests that she'd heard concerning things about my background. She'd strategically seated those charity directors she'd mentioned at tables where they could observe me. She'd even gone so far as to prepare a folder, a dossier of sorts, with her findings about my supposedly suspicious employment history, ready to share with key family members after the ceremony. One of the bridesmaids overheard her telling her sister, "I give it 6 months before she shows her true colors and tries to access his accounts. I'm just gathering evidence now, so we're prepared." I should have been furious, or at least nervous, but a strange calm had settled over me. Years of navigating high society events as a Rossi had taught me composure under pressure. Besides, I knew what was coming. At that moment, my phone rang. My father. "We're in position," he said simply. "Are you ready, Tesoro?" "More than ready, Papa," I replied. James sent a text shortly after. "My mother looks ridiculous. I'm so sorry. Are we still going with the plan?" "Absolutely," I texted back. "I love you." "I love you too. Can't wait to see their faces." As the ceremony time approached, I stood in the cathedral's antechamber, my heart pounding not with anxiety but anticipation. My dress was a custom Vera Wang, elegant, understated in its opulence, with handmade lace that had taken artisans months to create. I'd kept it simple, knowing that today was about more than fashion statements. Through the door, I could hear the murmur of 400 guests settling into their seats. The string quartet began playing the processional music for the bridal party. One by one, my bridesmaids walked down the aisle, followed by James's groomsmen. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The wedding planner gave me my cue, but I held up one finger. "Wait," I said, "just another minute." Right on schedule, I heard a commotion at the back of the cathedral. The sound of luxury car doors closing, of security personnel radioing each other, of guests turning in their seats and whispering in shock. My father had arrived, not as the unassuming parent of a modest nonprofit worker, but as Antonio Rossi, with his security detail, his executive assistant, and the unmistakable aura of someone who moved global markets with a single decision. The wedding planner's eyes widened. "Is that?" "My father," I said simply. "I believe he's ready to walk me down the aisle now." As the cathedral doors opened fully and the organist began the bridal march, I took a deep breath. The grand reveal was about to begin, and Vivian Chen, in her inappropriate white gown, was about to learn exactly who she had been trying to humiliate. The cathedral fell silent as my father appeared at the entrance. Antonio Rossi cut an impressive figure in his bespoke Italian suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his posture commanding respect without a word being spoken. Behind him stood 4 members of his security team, earpieces and subtle bulges under their jackets marking them as professionals. The wedding coordinator, now understanding the magnitude of what was happening, quickly signaled to the string quartet. The musicians, momentarily stunned by the entrance, recovered and began playing the bridal march with renewed vigor. My father offered me his arm, his eyes twinkling with mischief and pride. "Ready to make an entrance, Isabella." "I've been practicing all my life, Papa," I replied with a smile. As we stepped into view, the collective gasp was audible even over the music. 400 guests simultaneously recognized one of the world's wealthiest men, his face familiar from magazine covers, news programs, and charity galas. Phones immediately rose to capture the moment, despite our no photos request. "Is that Antonio Rossi?" I heard someone whisper loudly. "The Antonio Rossi, the tech billionaire," another responded. "What's he doing here?" The whispers spread like wildfire through the cathedral as we began our procession. I kept my eyes forward, focused on James waiting at the altar, but I couldn't help noticing the sea of shocked expressions we passed. Several of Vivian's society friends, women who had undoubtedly gossiped about the mysterious bride, were now frantically whispering behind their programs. Midway down the aisle, I allowed myself one glance toward Vivian, seated in the front row. Her face had drained of all color, the realization dawning that the woman she had investigated, insulted, and attempted to humiliate was the daughter of a man whose net worth exceeded the GDP of several small countries. Her white gown, meant to upstage me, now made her look desperately out of place. As we approached the altar, I looked up at James, who was beaming with barely contained laughter. His best man looked confused, glancing between James and my father as if trying to solve a complex equation. My father stopped at the appropriate moment, but instead of immediately giving my hand to James, he turned to address the congregation. This wasn't part of our plan, but I trusted him implicitly. "Before I give my daughter away," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the cathedral, "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate Isabella and James's love. Some of you have known my daughter her whole life. Others," his eyes flickered briefly toward Vivian, "are just beginning to know her. But all of you are witnessing the union of two people who found each other based on character, not circumstance." He turned to James then. "You loved my daughter before you knew she was a Rossi. That tells me everything I need to know about you." With that, he placed my hand in James's and stepped back, taking his seat in the front row, directly across from a still-stunned Vivian. The efficient, professional despite his obvious surprise, began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." As he spoke, I could see Vivian's charity director friends exchanging glances. The dossier she had prepared, her evidence of my suspicious background, now seemed laughable. One of them was actually on the board of my family's foundation and was clearly recognizing me for the first time. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. James and I exchanged our personally written vows, promising to love each other for who we were, not what we possessed. When the time came to exchange rings, James slipped on my finger not only the modest engagement ring he had originally given me, but also a stunning diamond band that matched it perfectly, symbolizing both chapters of our story. As the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, James whispered, "Ready for the finale." I nodded subtly. We turned to face our guests, and the officiant's voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you for the first time, Mr. James Chen and Mrs. Isabella Rossi Chen." On cue, my father stood and raised a champagne flute that had been discreetly provided by one of his staff. The cathedral's caretakers would normally never allow alcohol in the sanctuary, but exceptions were made for Antonio Rossi. "To my daughter and new son-in-law," he announced, "may your life together be built on the same honesty, respect, and love that brought you to this day." As guests raised their own glasses, which had mysteriously appeared in their hands, courtesy of waitstaff who had entered silently during the vows, my father added, "And may you always remember that true character reveals itself not when things are easy, but when they are challenging." With perfect timing, he turned his gaze directly to Vivian as he finished, "And may those who judge others remember that appearances can be deceiving." He took a sip from his glass, then, in a move so perfectly theatrical I knew he had planned it, let the crystal flute slip from his fingers. It shattered on the marble floor with a crystalline crash that echoed through the cathedral. In that moment of stunned silence, as everyone stared at the broken glass, James squeezed my hand. We had planned a subtle reveal, but my father had turned it into performance art. The message was unmistakable. The power dynamic Vivian thought existed had just been shattered as completely as that champagne flute. As we proceeded back down the aisle as a married couple, smartphones throughout the cathedral lit up with notifications. Someone, likely one of the society columnists Vivian had invited to witness my humiliation, had already broken the story. Tech billionaire's daughter WEDS in surprise revelation. Mother-in-law wears white to billionaire's wedding. The cathedral doors opened to reveal not just our vintage Rolls-Royce, but a full security detail and 3 additional luxury vehicles. Rose petals showered down on us as we emerged into the sunlight, and I heard the unmistakable sound of camera shutters from the paparazzi who had somehow gotten wind of the event. As James helped me into the car, I caught one last glimpse of Vivian, standing frozen on the cathedral steps, still in her inappropriate white gown, as guests streamed past her toward the reception, many already on their phones, undoubtedly spreading the news of what they had just witnessed. "Well," James said as the car door closed, "I think that went rather well, don't you?" I laughed, the tension of months finally breaking. "Your mother might disagree." "She'll survive," he said, taking my hand, "though I don't think she'll be wearing white again anytime soon." As our car pulled away, I rested my head on my new husband's shoulder, feeling not triumph but relief. The secret was out, the charade was over, and our real life together could finally begin. Our reception was held at the Rosalind Hotel, the city's most exclusive venue, a fact that had raised eyebrows when we'd booked it months ago, given my supposed modest means. Now, as guests filtered into the grand ballroom transformed by thousands of orchids and crystal installations, the extravagance made perfect sense. The cocktail hour was already in full swing by the time James and I arrived. We'd taken a detour for photos at my family's estate, images that would show not just us as newlyweds, but the full context of my background that had been hidden for so long. As we entered the reception, the band announced us, and 400 guests rose to their feet in applause. I scanned the room, noting the mix of emotions on display: genuine happiness from our friends, calculated reassessment from those who had doubted me, and open curiosity from everyone else. Vivian was nowhere to be seen. "Your mother," I whispered to James as we made our way to the head table. "Getting changed," he replied with a hint of satisfaction. "Dad convinced her that wearing white to the reception would be unwise." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his unwavering support throughout this complicated day. The reception unfolded like a dream, or perhaps more accurately, like the society event of the season it had suddenly become. The 7-course meal featured dishes from both our cultural backgrounds, with Italian and Chinese influences merged by a Michelin-starred chef. The wine served was from my family's vineyard in Tuscany, each bottle worth more than what many people spent on a month's rent. Midway through dinner, Vivian finally appeared, having changed into a navy blue evening gown. She made her way to our table, her expression carefully composed. "Isabella," she said, her voice just loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "I believe I owe you an apology." The conversations around us quieted as people strained to listen. "I made assumptions about you that were incorrect," she continued, each word seeming to cause her physical pain. "I hope you can forgive my misunderstanding." It wasn't a genuine apology, it was damage control. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, only that she'd targeted someone with more social power than she possessed. Still, I decided to be gracious in victory. "Of course, Vivian," I said warmly. "We're family now, and family forgives." I raised my glass to her, and after a moment's hesitation, she raised hers in return. The gesture was photographed by at least a dozen guests, undoubtedly already making its way to social media with captions about reconciliation. As Vivian retreated to her table, James leaned close to me. "That physically hurt her, you know." "I know," I said, unable to suppress a small smile. But sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simple kindness when cruelty was expected. The evening continued with dancing, toasts, and the cutting of our spectacular 5-tier cake. My father's toast was particularly moving. He spoke of my mother, who had passed away when I was 12, and how proud she would be of the woman I'd become. "Isabella could have used our name to open any door," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Instead, she chose to make her own way, to be loved for herself rather than her inheritance. That takes a courage few possess." He raised his glass to James. "And you, my new son, passed the most difficult test a father could devise, loving my daughter for her heart, not her bank account." The dance floor filled as the night progressed. I danced with my father, with James, with friends who had known my secret, and those who were still processing the revelation. Throughout the evening, I noticed Vivian's charity director friends making a point to speak with me, suddenly discovering urgent interest in my foundation work. "We should absolutely collaborate. one particularly persistent woman insisted, pressing her business card into my hand. I had no idea you were so involved in philanthropic circles. How strange, I replied pleasantly. I've been at every major foundation meeting for the past 5 years. As midnight approached, James and I prepared for our exit. Guests lined up with sparklers to light our path to the vintage Aston Martin that would take us to the airport for our honeymoon. Just before we left, Elena caught my arm. "You won't believe this," she whispered, showing me her phone. "You're trending." Sure enough, Rossi Wedding and Gold Digger Revenge were trending on multiple platforms. Someone had captured the moment of my father's entrance on video, despite our no recording policy, and it had already amassed millions of views. The comments ranged from shocked to delighted. The way the mother-in-law's face just dropped when she realized who the bride's father was, face with tears of joy. Rich people drama is the best drama. Imagine wearing white to a wedding, only to find out the bride is a literal heiress skull. I handed the phone back to Elena with a laugh. "Well, so much for keeping a low profile." "Are you kidding? This is the best wedding story ever," she said. "You're going to be fielding interview requests when you get back from your honeymoon." As James and I ran through the tunnel of sparklers toward our getaway car, rice and rose petals showering down on us, I spotted Vivian standing to the side. Our eyes met briefly, and I made a split-second decision. Breaking away from James, I walked over to her, aware of the hundreds of eyes watching us. "Thank you for coming," I said, and before she could respond, I embraced her in full view of everyone, a gesture of such public magnanimity that she had no choice but to return it. "I look forward to getting to know you better," I added as I pulled away, "as family." The look in her eyes told me she understood exactly what had happened. I had won not by humiliating her, but by being so gracious in my victory that her behavior looked even worse by comparison. I rejoined James, who was watching me with a mixture of amusement and admiration. "You're something else, Mrs. Rossi Chen," he murmured as he helped me into the car. "I learned from the best," I replied, thinking of my father's masterful handling of the day. As our car pulled away, guests cheering behind us, James took my hand. "So, was it everything you hoped for? The big reveal?" I thought for a moment, then smiled. "It was better, not because we put your mother in her place, though that was satisfying, but because now we can start our marriage with complete honesty. No more secrets, no more hiding." "To honesty," James agreed, raising an imaginary glass. "And to authenticity," I added, "the luxury some people never afford themselves." As the hotel disappeared behind us, I couldn't help but think about the day's events. Vivian had tried to expose me as someone unworthy, only to discover I was someone beyond her social reach. But the real victory wasn't in the reversal of fortune. It was in the knowledge that James and I had built our relationship on something more valuable than wealth or status: genuine love and acceptance of who we truly were. That, I realized, was the greatest privilege of all. Our honeymoon villa in the Maldives offered perfect seclusion from the media storm that had erupted after our wedding. On our first morning, as we sipped coffee on our private deck, overlooking the crystal-clear water, James scrolled through his phone and let out a low whistle. "We've officially gone viral," he announced, showing me the screen. "The video of your father's entrance has over 10 million views. There are reaction videos now. Someone set it to Imperial March from Star Wars." I laughed despite myself. "And your mother?" "Apparently White Dress Mill is also trending," he grimaced. "She's turned off her phone and told my dad she's taking a social media break." "Can't blame her," I said, feeling a twinge of sympathy despite everything. It's not every day you try to humiliate someone only to discover they're the heir to one of the largest family fortunes in the country. James set his phone down and took my hand. "Are you okay with all of this? The attention? I know you spent years avoiding it." I considered his question carefully, watching a school of tropical fish darting beneath our overwater bungalow. "I think I am. It was never about avoiding attention, really. It was about finding someone who saw me clearly, not my name or my family's assets." "Well, mission accomplished," he said, bringing my hand to his lips. "Though I have to admit, finding out your modest apartment was just one of many properties, and that little Volvo was a choice rather than a necessity was quite the plot twist." Are you disappointed you didn't marry a humble nonprofit worker? I teased. Devastated, he replied with mock seriousness. I was really looking forward to being the breadwinner. We spent our days snorkeling in turquoise waters, reading on pristine beaches, and enjoying the kind of uninterrupted time together that had been impossible during the wedding planning chaos. In the evenings, we talked about our future. Where we would live, we decided on my city apartment initially, with weekends at the estate, how we would balance our careers. James would continue his architectural practice while I maintained my foundation work, and when we might start a family. It was during one of these conversations, a week into our honeymoon, that James brought up his mother again. She sent me a text, he said, his expression unreadable. She's asking if she can meet with us when we return, just the three of us, no audience. I set down my wine glass. What do you think she wants? To save face, probably, he admitted, but maybe also to actually apologize. My dad said she's been reflective. Humiliation can do that, I observed. So can being wrong, James countered gently. Not that I'm defending her actions, what she did was horrible, but people can change when confronted with their mistakes. I thought about it. The easy path would be to keep Vivian at a distance, to let the natural consequences of her actions play out in our strained relationship. But that would hurt James, and ultimately, it would perpetuate a cycle of resentment that would poison our marriage. We'll meet with her, I decided. Not because she deserves immediate forgiveness, but because holding onto anger only hurts us. James's relief was evident. Thank you. That's one of the things I love most about you, your capacity for grace. The remainder of our honeymoon passed in blissful isolation. We agreed to extend our stay by another week, taking advantage of my flexible schedule and James's understanding clients. By the time we reluctantly packed to return home, the initial media frenzy had died down, though Alina warned me that requests for interviews were still flooding in. Opera's people called, she texted, twice. On our last night in paradise, we had dinner on the beach, a private table set up by the resort staff with candles and flowers. As the sun set in a spectacular display of orange and pink, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. What are you thinking about? James asked, noticing my contemplative mood. About masks, I said, the ones we wear and the ones we remove. Deep thoughts for our last night in paradise, he teased. I'm serious, I insisted. I spent years hiding part of myself, afraid that my family's wealth would prevent people from seeing the real me. Your mother spent years crafting an image of social importance, afraid that people wouldn't respect her otherwise. And now I'm wondering if the masks we wear eventually become our faces if we're not careful, I said. If we spend too long pretending to be someone else, do we forget who we really are? James considered this. Maybe. Or maybe the masks just show different facets of who we are. You're both Isabella Rossi, daughter of Antonio and Bella, the woman who volunteers at animal shelters and cries at sad movies. And your mother is both a social climber who wore white to her son's wedding and a woman who's probably sitting alone right now, realizing she nearly destroyed her relationship with her only child, he said. People contain multitudes, as they say. I raised my glass. To multitudes, then, and to taking off masks. To authenticity, James agreed, echoing my toast from our wedding night. As we clinked glasses, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The deception was over. The revelation had come in a more dramatic fashion than I'd planned, but it had served its purpose. James and I could begin our marriage with complete honesty about our backgrounds, our expectations, and our hopes for the future. And as for Vivian, I would meet with her when we returned, listen to whatever she had to say, and then decide how to proceed. Not with vengeance or spite, but with the same thoughtfulness I hoped she might someday show me. After all, as my father had said in his toast, true character reveals itself not when things are easy, but when they are challenging. The challenge of Vivian had revealed something about my character that I was proud of, the capacity to win graciously without becoming what I despised. In the end, that was a victory more satisfying than any revenge could ever be. 3 weeks after returning from our honeymoon, James and I found ourselves sitting in the private dining room of an upscale restaurant, waiting for Vivian. I'd chosen the venue carefully, neutral territory, but elegant enough that she wouldn't feel slighted. The small touches mattered in rebuilding bridges, especially with someone as status-conscious as my mother-in-law. "Are you nervous?" James asked, noticing me smoothing my napkin for the third time. "A little," I admitted. "I've faced down corporate boards and negotiated nine-figure donations, but somehow this feels more intimidating." "Because it's personal," he said, covering my hand with his, "and because you care about the outcome." Before I could respond, the maitre d' appeared with Vivian in tow. She looked different than she had at the wedding, more subdued, in a simple navy dress rather than her usual ostentatious attire. The past 3 weeks had clearly taken their toll. Fine lines around her eyes suggested sleepless nights. "James, Isabella," she greeted us, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." James stood to embrace his mother, and after a moment's hesitation, I did the same. Her body was stiff in my arms, but she didn't pull away. The first 10 minutes were excruciating, polite conversation about the weather, our honeymoon, edited highlights only, and the appetizers we'd ordered. Finally, after the waiter poured our wine and retreated, Vivian set down her glass and looked directly at me. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "A real one, not the performance I gave at your reception." I nodded but remained silent, giving her space to continue. "What I did was unforgivable," she went on. "The investigation, the white dress, the attempts to humiliate you. I convinced myself I was protecting James, but the truth is, I was protecting my own ego." "Mom," James began, but she held up a hand. "Please, let me finish." She took a deep breath. "When James told me he was marrying someone I'd never heard of, someone without the connections or background I'd always envisioned for him, I felt threatened. As if his choice somehow invalidated the life I'd built, the social position I'd worked so hard to achieve." She turned to me. "I never considered that you might be hiding your wealth rather than your lack of it. It never occurred to me that someone would choose to downplay their advantages." "Because you've spent your life doing the opposite," I observed, not unkindly. She flinched but nodded. "Yes, I've spent decades cultivating an image, collecting the right friends, joining the right boards. And in the process, I nearly lost something far more valuable, my relationship with my son." James reached across the table to take his mother's hand. "You haven't lost me, Mom." "But I could have," she said, her eyes glistening, "and I would have deserved it." She withdrew her hand and reached into her purse, pulling out a small velvet box. "This belonged to my grandmother," she said, placing it in front of me. "It's been passed down to the women in our family for generations." I opened the box to find a delicate jade pendant on a gold chain, simple but exquisite. "In our culture, jade represents purity and moral integrity," Vivian explained. "Qualities I failed to recognize in you and failed to demonstrate myself." The gesture moved me more than I'd expected. This wasn't just an apology, it was an acknowledgement, an acceptance of me into her family. "It's beautiful," I said softly. "Thank you, Vivian." "I don't expect immediate forgiveness," she continued. "But I hope, with time, we might build a relationship based on mutual respect rather than misunderstanding." I considered her words carefully before responding. "I think that's possible," I said finally. "But it will require honesty from all of us moving forward. No more masks, no more assumptions." "No more masks," she agreed. As our entrees arrived, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Vivian asked genuine questions about my foundation work, showing interest rather than suspicion. She spoke of her own childhood in Taiwan, revealing vulnerabilities I hadn't glimpsed before, how she'd grown up with little, how her own marriage had elevated her social standing, how she'd internalized the belief that worth was tied to wealth and position. "In a way," she admitted over dessert, "I envied your freedom to be loved for yourself. I've never been certain if people value me or what I represent." "I understand that feeling," I said, surprising myself with the realization that Vivian and I shared this fundamental insecurity, despite approaching it from opposite directions. As the evening drew to a close, Vivian mentioned that she'd been approached by several media outlets wanting her side of the white dress story. "I declined them all," she said. "Some things should remain private, even in this age of viral moments." "I appreciate that," I told her sincerely. Outside the restaurant, as we waited for our respective cars, Vivian turned to me one last time. Isabella, may I ask you something? Of course. If you had to do it over again, would you still hide your background from James? I considered the question seriously. Yes, I said finally, but I might have revealed the truth sooner. Not because I don't trust him, but because carrying a secret, even for the right reasons, becomes its own burden after a while. She nodded thoughtfully. And my behavior at the wedding, do you think I got what I deserved? James tensed beside me, but I squeezed his hand reassuringly. Justice and revenge aren't the same thing, Vivian. What happened wasn't about you getting what you deserved. It was about truth revealing itself, as it eventually always does. Wise words, she said softly. As her car arrived first, Vivian embraced us both. A genuine embrace this time, not the air kisses and stiff formality of our previous interactions. Family dinner next Sunday, she suggested tentatively. I could cook or we could go out. Why don't you come to our place? I offered. The apartment, not the estate. Let's start small. Relief washed over her face. I'd like that very much. As we watched her car pull away, James wrapped an arm around my waist. That went better than I expected. She's trying, I acknowledged. That's all we can ask for now. And the Jade pendant, will you wear it? I touched the box in my purse. Yes, I think I will, not because all is forgiven and forgotten, but because healing has to start somewhere. On the drive home, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past months, from hiding my identity to the dramatic revelation, from the viral humiliation of Vivian to this tentative peace. None of it had gone according to plan, yet somehow we had arrived at a better place than I could have engineered. Perhaps that was the final lesson in all of this, that authenticity, once embraced, creates its own path forward. The masks we wear, whether to hide privilege or to inflate status, ultimately prevent us from forming the connections we truly crave. As James and I entered our apartment, I paused in the doorway, struck by the symbolism of the space, modest by my family's standards, but chosen with care, filled with items that held meaning rather than merely impressive price tags. It represented the life we were building together, one based on choice rather than expectation. Welcome home, Mrs. Rossi Chen, James said, kissing me softly. It's good to be home, I replied, meaning it in every sense of the word. I was home in this space, in this marriage, and finally in my own skin, no longer hiding, no longer pretending to be less than I was. The justice I'd received at my wedding hadn't come from Vivian's humiliation, satisfying though that had been in the moment. It had come from the freedom to finally be fully myself, to be loved completely, and to move forward without secrets or shame. That, I realized, was the greatest wedding gift of all.
Isabella, thank you for sharing your story with us today. What you experienced was truly painful, but your response reveals a powerful truth. When someone tries to expose what they believe is your weakness, they may inadvertently set the stage for your greatest strength to shine. This isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your narrative and standing in your full identity without apology. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, here on Wedding Day Justice, veils off, justice on.